Once and for all, why don't I'm sitting here thinking, the beat cartel. Why don't you just simply break this thing down?
Break it down. Break it down. Pull in these scriptures, let me show you how to break it down. Break it down. Break it down. Break it down. If you pull in that scripture, you need to break it down. Break it down. Break it down. Pull in these scriptures, let me show you how to break it down.
All right. All right. So the topic of today is Genesis with a hint of the law of Moses, and I'm going to take a look at the book of Genesis that seems to have a hint of the law of Moses. Let's start at Genesis 4. Yeah. Genesis 4, starting at 1. New King James Version. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Also Abel brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but did not respect Cain and his offering. Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. And, so the first thing I'm going to point out is God seems to have implied that he already told them what to do. And that's why he says, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? And so it implies that he already knew what to do. God already established the laws. And what I think part of this proves is that although it's called the law of Moses, it's not the law of Moses, but rather the law of God. And this proves on this lesson will prove how God has always dealt with people. It seems to have always dealt with us from the beginning, and gave us some rules and laws to follow, which also seem to be carried out into the law of Moses, so-called, and will be carried out in the future. But we're just going to show how Genesis has a hint of Moses, the law of Moses. Now, if you look at the footnotes, it says Cain brought an offering of the fruit, which is linked to Numbers 18. Abel also brought of the firstborn, linked to Numbers 18. And the fat is linked to Leviticus 3:16. So, obviously the commentators, whoever put the footnotes, realizes that these laws are also very similar, if not the same, as the so-called law of Moses. Another reason why I say so-called is because, remember guys, it is the law of God, not the law of Moses. Moving on to Genesis 7. Then the Lord said to Noah, come into the ark, and you all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. You shall not with you shall take with you 7 of each of every clean animal, a male and his female, 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. Now, again, how would you know unclean and clean, except for the law of Moses? And obviously we're not saying that, this guy had had Moses' book per se, but again, this is God's law, not Moses' law. And so it's interesting that God already has a distinction between clean animals, and unclean animals. And yeah, that's it, I guess. So yeah, oh yeah, I wanted to look. All right, yeah. So also again, we have footnotes that are pointing us to the law, and so it's it's interesting how we have these same laws. Moving on to 9, Genesis 9. This is a law that seems to always been implemented. And I think a lot of Christians actually don't follow this even today, and it was a New Testament law too. Starting at 3, every morning every moving thing that lives shall be good for you. I have given you all things, even as the green herbs. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Surely for your lifeblood, I will demand a reckoning. So basically, if you eat that blood, he's going to kill you. Again, we already have verses that are showing us that we see glimpses of the Old Testament, and we have a reference here again in Exodus, and more references to the law. So again, we see more laws that were in the book of Moses way back with Genesis, way back with Adam and Eve, way back with Noah. Moving on to Genesis 10, God says, now this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth. The sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth were Wu. And basically what's happening is just how we have the Old Testament, or the Torah says to carry on. It uses the bloodline of the father, and it also talks about how your brother will carry on your name, since you are the male. So if your wife dies or whatever, or if you die and your wife is still alive. So we have a oh my gosh, I don't know why I'm yawning so much. So again, we have some more hints of Moses inside Genesis, some more of the law of God, and versus the law of Moses. All right, now move on to 12. And wow, I have no clue why. Alright, so 7. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord who has appeared to him. And he moved from there to the mountains east of Bethel. And he pitched his tent within Bethel on the west, and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord. Now, so what I didn't point out in the last one was that clearly had to have been a sacrifice in the last one, because it talks about eating Oh yeah, eating meat with blood, or which one was? Yeah, was the left? Yeah, so eating meat with blood and of the oh no, okay. So in Adam, when we I forgot to touch on that. So back with Adam in Genesis 4, 4 and 5. So he talks about Abel brought his firstborn of the flock and of their fat. Again, so that was a sacrifice, that an offering or a sacrifice that even Abel made. And then when we move on to Genesis 12, we have an altar. Again, we have an altar built by Abraham. Verse 7, again, which appeals to the altar that is built for sacrifices for in the Torah. You had to build an altar before you made a sacrifice. We move on to 14. Man, how does this always happen? Okay, there we go. So moving on, 14:20. Start at 18. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out of bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, I want to check something out. So he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram, God of Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tithe of all. A tithe means a tenth. And we see Abram giving a tithe to a priest or to a king. Or he is also a priest as well. So again, giving the tithe to the priest. So we have more hints of Moses inside Genesis, dealing with Melchizedek, and how Abraham just gave him a tenth. I wanted to take a look at the reference they give. Where was it? Here we go. Exodus 29:40. So in Exodus 29:40, where they reference it, it says, with the first lamb offer a tenth of an ephah of the finest flour mixed with a quarter of hin of oil from pressed olives and a quarter of hin of wine as a drink offering. So that's again interesting how this king brings out bread and wine, and the commentators are linking that to Exodus 29:40, which is a part of the law. So again, we have more hints of Moses inside the book of Genesis. Moving on to 17:11. Genesis 17:11 says, let's start at 10, says, this is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male child among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins. And it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days among you, 8 days old among you, shall be circumcised, every male child in your generations. So, boom, we have sacrifice before Moses. Not just any not sacrifice, but circumcision, and it doesn't. And not only that, it's the 8th day again. Here we go, back to Torah, Leviticus 3 is where it's linking us. Shows the 8th day we're supposed to be circumcised. Again, implying that God has already had these sorts of things in His mind and part of His way of life. Is that 19:5? Let's move on to Genesis in 19:5. Oh yeah, and one thing I wanted to bring up is where Jesus says, I don't know if anyone remembers. Let me see if I can pull it up. Give me a second. Where did Jesus say? I'm trying to get it for the people who may have not seen it before. Jesus basically talks about how circumcision came from the patriarchs, and which is just interesting because you alright, so let's go to John 7:22. Just take a look at this. Moving on to John 7:22. And it says, Moses therefore gave you circumcision, not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers, and you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. Now, this word fathers, some people do patriarchs. When you look up a patriarch, it says any of those biblical figures, regarded as fathers of the human race, especially Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their forefathers, or the sons of Jacob. So patriarch just means the people back in the day. So again, we have more of the law of Moses in the Old Testament. Now let's move on to was that Genesis? Yeah, Genesis 19:5. It says, alright, so some may be familiar with this story. Now, starting at 4, it says, now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter, surrounded the house, and they came to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out with us, that we may know them carnally. Basically, they want to have sex with them. And so Lot says, so Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind them, and said, please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See, now I have $2, and he basically gives his daughters. Now, that wasn't the right thing to do. Just give away your daughters so they could be raped. But the fact that he knew that homosexuality was wrong, where did he get that from? Somebody had to have passed that down. God had to have communicated that with him. Remember, Lot was inside Sodom, where this was a normal thing. So I don't see why he would think that was such a wrong thing, unless he just, again, unless God has already ordained such an act or such a law. Moving on to 20, Genesis 20:6 says, and God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against me, therefore I did not let you touch her. Now therefore restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. So what's happening here is Abraham has his sister with him, and he says, oh, you look so good. They're basically going to think that they're going to kill me so they can have you, and so tell him you're my sister, blah blah. So God comes to the guy in the dream and says, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. So let's start back at 5. Did you not say to me, she is my sister? And she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart, this is the king talking, and innocence of my hands I have done this. So, God says him in the dream. Obviously, the guy knows the context. So he says, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now, therefore, restore the man's wife. So, this guy, this king, whoever this was, realizes there's an adultery. Oh my God, this isn't my wife. Even though this guy said that, hey, yeah, you can have her, that's my sister. He finds out later that it's not his sister and it's his wife, and so, well, I guess both, but whatever. Basically, it's his wife, so he knows that he can't be with her. There's that law right there. There's a law of adultery. Not even 10 commandments were given at this time. So we have more evidence that God is dealing with people and giving them some sort of guidance and law, even in the book of Genesis. Let's get that one, since basically already went over that. We'll do Genesis 22. Genesis 22, starting at 1. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham, and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. Then he said, take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering, one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. So again, this is another one that shows the burnt offering, the sacrifice going on even in the Old Testament. And even though he didn't do it, he still knew what to do. He still knew the concept. He still knew what he had to do to build an altar. Genesis 24. It's alright. Genesis 24 and 37 and 38. Now my master made me swear, saying, You shall not take a wife from my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I dwell, but you shall go to my father's house and to my family and take a wife for my son. And I said to my master, Perhaps the woman will not follow me. But he said to me, The Lord before whom I walk will send his angel with you and prosper your way. So what we have here is the maybe the law of marrying someone within your own clan, within your own peoples. And this is something we see in the Torah. And what's quite interesting also is you see this in the New Testament, where it talks about do not be with someone who's unequally yoked. We're not really supposed to be dealing with unbelievers. And the Canaanites weren't the same people, neither were they dealing with God like Abraham was. So Abraham and his family were sticking together. And there was probably a reason why he didn't want the Canaanites. And I'm believing that it was because of the wickedness. So yeah, that's another one that we see that's a law, part of the law of Moses, and actually part of the law of the New Testament, and we see it in Genesis. Let's do 34. Let's do 31. Let's do 31 and 39. Alright, starting at 30. These 20 years I have been with you. Your Ewis. I don't even know what that is. What is that? Ewis is a female sheep. Wow. Okay, so your female sheep and your female goats, which, okay, have not miscarried their young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beasts, I did not bring to you. I bore it, the loss of it. There we go. Exodus 22. Another hint of Moses inside Genesis, where you're not allowed to eat meat torn by wild beasts. Part of the reason the blood's still in the meat. But again, we see more of the law of Moses being shown in Genesis. And we'll go to one last one because I have two more, but that one was on intermarrying. But again, we touched on that already. So we'll move to 38 and 8. Alright. Oh yeah, I think I did touch this, so I want to see if I can. So 38 and 8. And the Lord, alright, so and Judah said to Onan, Go into your brother's wife and marry her and raise up an heir. Oh, okay. Yeah, so the last one was like intermarrying, and this one is more like this was marrying your brother's wife. So we see this in Genesis, where God is having them. Now here we go. We have Israelites at this time, but we still have that law of where you're marrying your brother's wife because you're raising up an heir. You're raising up that name for them. So you're keeping the name going. I'm trying to see. There was one more. I think there was a bonus one I had. Oh man, I thought I put it on here. Well, I won't put it on here because it's not necessarily in the book of Genesis, but it's an interesting verse. It was before the law. So there you go. Very quick, not too long video on Genesis with a hint of the law of Moses in it. And I think it's safe to say that it's not the law of Moses, it's the law of God. So yeah, that's all we got for today. Happy Sabbath day. It's about the end of the Sabbath. Shabbat Shalom. Peace out.
Yes.
Once and for all, why don't I'm saying a thing to the bean cartel? Why don't you just simply break this thing down?
Break it down.